The Phantom Archives of Edgar the Architect and Schale by Jen Kagami. Volume 18, Turku. The alternation of perspective and the Nordic cloudiness. Salmon dill distortion. 1. Golden salmon and the anesthesia of the far north. Hey Edgar, this soup has such a comforting taste. The scent of the dill and the rawness of the salmon go so well together. In the freezing winter of Turku, Finland, at the old brick-built Tinto standing along the Aura River, at a window seat covered in thick frost, Schale let out an ennui-laden sigh. His pearl-coloured hair clinging to his nape inhaled the dull leaden winter light and became bewitchingly translucent. Within the deep white porcelain dish, lohikeitto, salmon soup, made by boiling down fatty salmon, caught in the far northern sea, and root vegetables in a violent amount of heavy cream, radiated a golden heat. However, its surface was completely covered with a massive amount of green dill, as if to thoroughly conceal the fishiness. This soup is not merely for tasting. It is also an anesthesia, known as thermal mass, to escape the far northern reality of freezing to death. It is a harsh land. Edgar quietly tilted a glass of aquavit, chilled like ice, with translucent wax-white fingertips. His profile was cruel, as if carved directly from a freezing glacier, harbouring the contours of perfect geometry that permitted no flaws. Before the coldness noise that brings one face to face with death, the delicate flavours of ingredients are meaningless. This chef resolved the reality of extreme cold through the most rational method, completely painting it over with the scent of violent fat and herbs. A magnificent design. Purposefulness to conceal the raw presence of death. Having delivered his chilling pronouncement, Edgar donned a heavy jet-black ulster coat, tailored as if by cutting the darkness itself, and stood up. Schale, too, innocently wiped the golden cream remaining on the edge of his lips, faintly reddened by the extreme cold of the north, with a fingertip, and rose from his seat. Enveloping his fragile limbs was a heavy, snow-white, low-gauge sweater, thick as if woven with silver threads. The smooth nape, like porcelain that knew no sunlight, peeking through the rough, loose mesh, highlighted a cruelly fragile, ephemeral silhouette. Stepping out of the restaurant, the freezing wind from the Baltic Sea, sharp as a blade, mercilessly robbed the two of their body heat. From the grey sky, powder snow danced down soundlessly. It's so cold, it hurts. Even wearing clothes, it feels like my skin is going to freeze and crack. Schale trembled his long eyelashes against the piercing cold, shrinking his body as if to cover half his face with his snow-white cuff. Deep within those eyes, an absolute scar that Edgar must never touch, precipitated faintly, like bubbles at the bottom of ice. The winter in this country mercilessly pares away the contours of life. That is precisely why the place we are heading to now is filled with a sweet, dangerous anesthesia meant to avert one's eyes from the reality of death. Edgar turned up his coat collar against the freezing wind and fixed his gaze on the deep pine forest in the outskirts of Turku. Deep in the snow-covered silent forest, the structure crouched quietly, as if mimicking a part of nature itself. The Resurrection Chapel in Turku, designed by Eric Brigman. It is the same as the soup from earlier. As a result of thoroughly attempting to cover up the rawness of death with the herb known as the forest, it discarded the absolute, singular God and snuggled up to the spirits of the forest. Animism, a space of heresy. Come, Schale. A visual inspection of a pathological architecture that has lost its discipline is required. 2. The asymmetrical altar and the forest of heresy. Passing through the heavy bronze doors, the moment they stepped into the nave, Schale stopped at a strange sense of incongruity. It's weird. Even though it's a chapel, it doesn't feel sacred at all. In fact, my gaze is being pulled to the window on the right on its own. Exactly as Schale said, the space had completely destroyed the absolute rules of religious architecture. While the left side facing the altar was coldly closed off by an inorganic, robust wall, the right side was opened up, almost defenselessly, toward the snow-covered pine forest by a continuous series of gargantuan glass windows. Naturally, for this is not a place to offer prayers to God. Dragging his jet-black cloak, Edgar quietly scraped the dead-silent stone floor with his smooth leather shoes. His chilling gaze was directed at the altar and cross, shoved crampedly into the deepest part of the space. Originally, a chapel must be an absolute centripetal space for confronting God, the transcendent. However, Brigman, of all things, intentionally shifted the axis of the space, not toward God, the altar, but toward nature, the forest on the right. He is forcibly guiding the gaze of the bereaved families not to the eternal God, but to the shifting light and plants. Does that mean he prioritized the scenery of the forest over God? Schale softly extended his pearl-coloured fingertips toward the black pine branches swaying beyond the glass. His arm extending from the sleeve of his snow-white sweater was as thin and translucent as glasswork. Yes, from the perspective of an orthodox theologian, this is a spine-chillingly pantheistic, animistic approach, a space of heresy that denies the foundation of Christianity. However, to scatter the heavy pressure of the bereaved sorrow like anesthesia, the presence of the forest swaying in the light functioned far better than the strict teachings of God. Edgar twisted his lips chillily, as if looking down upon the altar. The essence of design is always purposefulness, Schale. He did not betray God. For the problem-solving of efficiently peeling the living away from the sorrow of death, he judged that nature was more usable than God, and merely discarded him rationally. However, the price of bringing in an unknown bug known as 8 million spirits, even at the cost of destroying the discipline of the space, is by no means cheap. This space, having lost its sole absolute sovereign, is now unable to withstand the erosion of the forest and is causing a fatal contradiction. 3. The false halo and the freezing golden thorns. But Edgar, look at that lighting. It looks somewhat warm. Schale pointed at the high vaulted ceiling with glasswork-like fingertips peeking from the sleeve of his snow-white sweater, a cluster of golden brass lights floating in the mid-air of the asymmetrical space. Those lights, possessing organic curves mimicking plant vines and leaves, radiated a faint heat in the chilled stone space, like soft patches of sunlight, or a halo floating above a saint's head. False suns. Brigman, who drove the sole and absolute God into the corner of the space, required a substitute to fill that void and scatter the sorrow of the bereaved. Therefore he suspended that indigenous golden light, mimicking sunlight filtering through the forest trees in mid-air. Edgar, enveloped in his jet-black cloak, looked up at the lighting with a cruel gaze, as if viewing a mere functional device. It is not the stern light pouring down from the heavenly God that a true church possesses. This is an extremely functional, sickly sweet deception noise, designed solely to nestle close to human sentimentality and soften sorrow like anesthesia. However, having lost the absolute discipline of a single God and snuggled up to the presence of the 8 million in the forest, this space can no longer maintain its own contours. The moment Edgar muttered low, the black pine forest beyond the windows began an eerie quickening. The ivy crawling within the hall withered black and fell, and the golden lights blinked madly, accompanied by a grating sound of electrical discharge. "Watch your step, Schale." The gold of God, peeling from the creaking glass, possesses a cruelty that surpasses the blades of this world. It will easily rend that white porcelain skin of yours. Schale, it comes. Upon the glass membrane, a fanatical reconquista is squirming. The sole God, whose throne was usurped by the forest, lets his cruel authority crawl to paint over the windows with golden icons. Opposing this, the 8 million spirits cause the freezing pine forest to bloom madly, beginning to squirm to reclaim that transmission through the colours of life. Mies van der Rohe said God is in the details. But here, those very details are the front lines of a hideous territorial dispute. The jet-black ulster coat flourished, shielding the faintly trembling pearl-coloured hair behind his back. The freezing starboard glass surface. There, the cruel gold of Byzantium was already crawling up like frost, sealing the freezing landscape into blindness. However, the forest on the outer rim would not permit this. Forcibly dragging out a frenzied spring, it slammed blood-red petals and toxically vivid autumn leaves against the reverse side of the transmission, hideously adhering to the golden authority and raising a creak. It looks like primary-coloured vomit. The smell of heated gold leaf and rotting flowers is mixing, and my vision is murky. Schale covered his nose with his snow-white cuff. The authority of the sole God and the obsession of the 8 million. They are rubbing their respective egos against each other upon a membrane a mere few millimeters thick. Regardless of which wins, the original purposefulness of the window to let light pass through and frame the scenery has completely rotted. Edgar's wax-white fingertips chillily look down at the borderline contaminated by primary colours. It is merely a hideous object. Enough, Schale. Let us return. This is no longer architecture, merely the stomach of the forest. The reversing jet-black cloak tore through the freezing air. The moment the heavy bronze doors creaked shut, the creaking of primary colours and gold behind them was completely severed by the thick stone walls. The closed room, having lost its observers, merely froze quietly as meaningless wreckage. Outside, the blizzard had stopped, and thin winter sunlight shone through the gaps in the conifers. Treading the fresh snow, the two began to walk through the silent pine forest. Brigman chose the flow of time as the anesthesia for sorrow, didn't he? Schale let his pearl fingertips peek from his snow-white cuffs, innocently flicking the freezing pine needles. Instead of an eternal God, he showed them the shifting seasons of the forest, making them believe that life returns. But it wasn't comforting at all. Naturally, to us, who stand outside of time, the anesthesia known as the cycle of seasons does not work. Edgar's glacial profile spat out cruelly. Purposefulness meant for mortals is merely tedious noise to eternal bystanders. Ah, Edgar. Look, at the end of Schale's lowered gaze, a single reddish-brown squirrel was holding an ice-like nut, gnawing at it busily. Its small, rounded back radiated a certain heat amidst the extreme cold. Cute. With such a small body. Edgar stopped his feet, looking down chillily at the small beast. Fur to survive the extreme cold, and lean feeding behaviour. There exists neither faith in God nor pandering to nature there. A faint sneer floated upon the profile that looked carved from a glacier. Compared to that lump of concrete that lost sight of its own contours, that single beast is a far more perfect purposefulness design. Now let us return, Schale. Your thoroughly chilled body requires warm tea and lean sugar. End of Volume 18.